Dr. Jennifer Bute, you've been living with dementia for quite a few years now, so how do you view it now?
Well, I find it quite exciting in a way. I had no idea in the past I'd end up with dementia or symptoms of dementia, but it's quite amazing to see how almost all that has happened during my life has been helpful in coping with it, understanding it, and then using it in a beneficial kind of way. I believe very strongly that gifts are given for the edification of the church. They're not given for one's own benefit. And I see my dementia as a gift. It's because I understood dementia professionally, having been a doctor. My father had it. But it's very different from the inside. And now I have the privilege of living in a place where there are so many other people with dementia. So I'm always learning what works and what doesn't work. It's just wonderful. I love it.
So some people listening would be confused by your attitude because for them their experience of dementia is slightly different.
We're all different. Everyone is different. It's said frequently, you know one person with dementia, you know one person with dementia, and everyone else is different. But even in this place, I've been here, over 6 years now, and many people with dementia have died because we come here until we die, but we live well until we die. It is not true that it can be dreadful, dreadful all the time. I believe passionately the person is still there, locked inside the condition, and I love trying to explain to people how you have to find the key. It's as if, they're inside a locked house and they've lost the key to the front door. Well, if you're visiting someone and they don't answer the door and you know they're there, you don't give up and go away. I love asking people what they would do. Well, you do all kinds of things. You might try the back door, looking through the window, get a ladder if necessary, and they're all kind of analogies that you can use for finding that person. And there's nothing that gives me greater joy than finding the person that other people say isn't there anymore, because the person is still there right to the end. My father could still pray fervently to God and talk about God even if he didn't know who I was.
And as a person of faith, as a Christian, how do you care for that side of your life?
That's a good question, because many people with dementia are spiritually starved. People assume that they don't have any spiritual needs anymore, or people just rush in and give them communion, which is not good enough. They need to be fed spiritually, and what I do, and I do wish someone would take it on as a project, I have a calendar of Bible verses, and I take these verses to people and read it to them, people who've got faith. But so often the verses are not suitable. If only someone could produce a daily calendar of suitable verses in large print, it would be wonderful. But there isn't one yet. I've tried various ones. So you take the verse to them, even if the date's wrong, because it's not always right and appropriate to take today's date. And then I read the verse to the person, and I read it 2 or 3 times until they smile. And they recognise it, and I say, it's a lovely verse, you know that one, don't you? And they'll smile and nod their head, and something's got through. And then we talk about it. And I think it's tragic that these people aren't helped and fed and encouraged spiritually, because we forget simple spiritual truths. We need to be reminded. I mean, I listen to my daily Bible reading every day because I can't remember where I got up to. Well, I can't remember what I listened to this morning. I'm sorry, I can't. But God knows, and it's gone in there somewhere. And that's important, because we do forget. But unless it's renewed and we're reminded, it can be forgotten even more. So I think we have a responsibility to help people who love the Lord to remember basic spiritual truths.
And it's that recognition, it's that understanding that the spirit is still alive and needs to be fed.
The spiritual never dies. And as a doctor, you can do scans of the brain as to where this, that and the other is, where you see and hear and all that. But they can't find where the spiritual centre in the brain is. So it doesn't matter what happens to the rest of the brain. Whatever the cause of the brain damage, the spiritual remains. It does.
And by saying the Lord's Prayer, by reading familiar psalms, all those connections can be made.
That's right. And familiar verses, familiar passages. And many people were brought up on reading their Bible far more than they are nowadays. So I think it's going to be a problem that becomes more difficult, possibly, as the younger generation come up. I don't know. But for the older generation at the moment, most of them are seeped in the Bible from Sunday school. Even if they don't go to church anymore, they still have that background. And I found it so exciting here. People who haven't been to church since they were married, but they still remember verses and stories from their Sunday school days. And it's possible to, in a sense, remind them of that and build on it.
And if one was to sing Love Divine, which is a hymn they may have had at a wedding.
Yes, yes.
All those wonderful...
Yes.
Joyous memories return.
That's right. That's right. A Scripture Union do a wonderful CD, words of hope, words of praise and words of faith, I think. And they're very popular here. I use them with a lot of people, and even without the church background, they remember them from the past, as you say. Those kind of funerals and weddings and things like that, yeah.
So what does the future hold? I know one thing that you're talking about is you're going to publish a book later in the year. Is this something that you wanted to do?
It wasn't my idea. It was after radio and television things.
And people like me.
Yes, magazine articles and so on. I was asked to write a book, and I can't anymore. I might look as if I'm perfectly all right. It's interesting. People with dementia can still talk very often. Talk perfectly well, but we can't read or write unless we know what it says. So I was asked for a book, by various organisations and things. So to cut a long story short, Louise Morse has been my ghostwriter, and she's written the book with me, and it's being published by SPCK later this year, and it's called Dementia from the Inside, A Doctor's Personal Journey of Hope. And it's really a story of how I came to be the person I am and how I see God fit into my life and how God has taught me so much through the tough things that have happened to me. I often find people who walk close with God have had tough times because that's what's brought us closer to God. And it's how then God has used all that, and how I have found out through experience with Professor Karashima how we can actually do something to delay, improve dementia, because I really believe we can. It's like stroke. 10, 15 years ago, people didn't do anything for stroke. They didn't. But nowadays, we expect people who've had stroke to improve. Some get better completely, don't they? But we expect some improvement. Well, why not with dementia? It's crazy, isn't it? It's because of the interventions. They have physiotherapy and speech therapy, and they're actively encouraged to do things, isn't it? But we have this window of opportunity with a stroke. Well, why not with dementia? So the earlier we start, the better.
And one of the things that you touched on just there was the importance of conversation. And this is something that we can all do, even if we just start talking about memories from the 1920s and the 30s.
Yes. And people love talking about the past. And often people don't know what to say to people with dementia. But if you start talking about something, what you must never do is to start conversations by asking questions, because that makes us freeze inside because we think, help, I'm not going to know the answer. But if you start talking about something, I remember when, it kind of takes us along with you and we can join in. So if you say, I remember during the war, well, I can't because I was born after the war, but I heard that, during the war or in this situation or that situation, and then often they will come in with their own memories, and then you can build on that.
And I remember Dorothy and Audrey that I know well, and I go and visit them in a care home in Gateshead, and we have the most precious times as they remember and they recount, and you can see that they're enjoying telling their stories.
Yes, they do, and they love telling stories. You just got to find the key again as to what it is that sets them off, and once they're set off, my word. And laughing works. I've discovered that with my groups. There's one lady who comes to the group, hardly says a word, but one day we were roaring with laughter. I can't remember why, but laughter's so important. And she started telling me stories about her childhood, which was marvellous. So anything that helps is by all means save some, isn't it? By all means get people to talk and enjoy things and remember the past well.
Thanks so much for sharing with us. Is there one thing that you would just challenge everybody to do in connection with this illness?
Well, it's an illness like any other. It's no worse than any other. I think there are even worse illnesses than this. I do. A lot worse. But whatever happens, is we live in a broken world. But God has come into our broken world. So let's do what we can, to show God's love and acceptance and walk the path with these people with joy.